Good evening. So my name is Attila and I'm going to talk about problem-based learning today. I'm from Attila University, and this is part of a bigger research project. And today I'm going to talk about the focus group research interviews, so the qualitative data. Our study is financed by the Hungary Academy of Science. Okay. So first, in the first part, I'm going to talk about problem-based learning. Okay, so I would like to provide a definition of problem-based learning. Basically, this approach or method started in medical education in the United States. In Hamilton in the 1960s, Barrows and Tamblyn were the pioneers of, or the inventors of this approach. And it was used for facilitating the learning process of medical students because the vast amount of learning material was not necessarily digestible for the students. So and they also did not see the relevance to practice, so that's why problem-based learning facilitated their learning process. If you look at the definition provided by Mello and Silver, it is defined as it is a teaching method or approach in which students learn through assisted problem solving. It also supports experience-based education, and also content and thinking strategies are acquired through the experience of solving problems. Also, Mello and Silver 2004 mentioned several features of problem-based learning. The first is that a problem is, or a complex problem is provided to the students, and these problems might have different solutions, so there is not only one solution for the problem. It's really important. Also, it's not an individual work, so students work collaboratively to solve the problem. Also, students engage in self-directed learning, also apply their new knowledge to solve the problems, and there is also self-reflection in it, so students reflect on what they learned and how effective their strategies were. And the teacher's role is a facilitative role, so it's not that teachers provide knowledge, as in different or other methods. Okay, the goals of problem-based learning are the following. So basically, students are helped and given flexible knowledge, effective problem-solving skills, self-directed learning skills, as I mentioned, and effective collaboration skills. And finally, problem-based learning also boosts students' motivation, especially intrinsic motivation. As I mentioned, it started in medical education, so in natural sciences, and there was a delay in which problem-based learning was introduced into social sciences. Actually, there is a 10-year delay, and also in language learning, so in language teaching, it was also delayed. It was also delayed. The question is that why? Are there any reasons for this delay? So Ansari and Theo provide some reasons for this delay. There is a problem of defining what a problem is, especially in language learning. We will see in this study also. Also, there is no available model that we can follow, which is tailored for language education. That's why problem-based learning is actually a neglected area in the field of language education. So if we look at the Google Scholar and search for the keywords, we can find, I think, only one paper which was published in a Q1 journal in System by Lin, which actually uses problem-based learning or investigates the effectiveness of problem-based learning. That's why we have a dearth of studies on problem-based learning. So let's talk about, I'm going to talk about the current study, which is a kind of a preliminary study of a bigger study in which we conducted interviews. In this study, we conducted interviews, and then after that we developed questionnaires. So that was the second phase. We had two questions. We were interested in the teachers' experiences and what are the thoughts about problem-based learning, problem-based language learning more precisely, whether they know about anything about it and whether they apply it, use it in the EFL classroom. And also, what are the perceptions? So these were the two questions that we asked in the study. So first we created an interview guide, which we piloted with PhD students, with 5 PhD students. And there were 6 questions that we asked during these interviews. The first one was about the language-related problems, so whether they encounter, whether they face or meet language-related problems in the EFL classroom. Also, we were interested in whether these problems originate from the students or originate from outside or inside the classroom, or from the classroom. We were also interested in the frequency, so we calculated how many times they mention problem-based learning or problems which were related to language learning. And we were also interested in what kind of individual differences they take into account when they employ problem-based learning. And finally, we asked whether they are able or whether they have any definition of problem-based learning. So the participants in this study, so we had 7 teachers in 3 focus groups. We followed the convenience sampling with maximum variation, and also, as I mentioned before, so we piloted the focus group interview guide. Probably if there are some experts on methodology would question the validity of including 2 interviewees in a focus group, but actually these interviews lasted 90 minutes, and it was especially time-consuming, and it was really tiring to pay attention, even if there were 2 moderators. I was one of the moderators, and we got sufficient data what we wanted. As you can see, all of these were teachers except one. So we had a director of an elementary school. They were considered experienced teachers. Predominantly we had female teachers. So what methods we had? So as I mentioned, there were 2 moderators. One of the moderators asked the questions, the other basically followed and interrupted when one of the participants dominated the conversation or the interview. And then they swapped roles when it was really tiring to concentrate. These interviews were conducted online in Teams, and there were 2 schools included it. We had a primary school from rural Hungary. There were so many problems with special needs education, also with motivation. And we had a secondary school which is placed in Budapest, and that was a prestigious secondary school, and there were many big differences in these two schools. And we followed content analysis by Krippendorf, 2013. So let's have a look at the results. So first I'm going to talk about the experiences. So the problems that teachers listed were related to language learning. That's not necessarily surprising because that's what we asked. Now the question obviously comes that whether these problems were real problems that can be applied and that can be equal with problem-based learning. They also listed several general topics, so problems that were not related to language or language learning, but problems that were related to general ideas. And also they listed their problems with language teaching. That was really interesting. And it's also important to mention here that we did not provide a definition of problem-based learning at the very beginning of the interview. So basically teachers did not have an idea. I mean, probably they had some ideas about what problem learning is from their previous learning or education. Okay, so this is what we got. So as you can see in the table, we had several language learning problems or problems that were related to language learning. These were, for example, students came up with new words and they asked the teachers about the meaning of these words, and then They looked up these words in a dictionary, and that was considered as a problem. Obviously, it's not, in a narrow sense, cannot be considered as a problem-based learning activity or process. The second one, about general topics, this was more related to problem-based learning, I would say. So one of the teachers gave this task in the secondary school. So the prompt was, if you were a food, what would you be and why? And then students were really motivated when this task was given. I'm going to talk about it later. And the other problems were related to language teaching. I wouldn't consider these problems or problem-based learning ideas, because these were rather the problems of the teachers had during teaching, which are related to teaching conditionals, grammar, course books, etc. Okay, so let's have a look at the results and some examples for the different categories. As I mentioned, the vocabulary learning, which was about finding the meaning, finding out the meaning of a word, of a specific word, and probably, if you remember, one of the facets or characteristics of problem-based learning is collaboration. So in this activity, we could find traces of collaborations because teachers also took part in the searching process of or finding out the meaning of the words. If you look at the general learning problems, as I mentioned, that could be considered as a real problem which can be seen as a problem-based learning activity, in which a prompt was provided to the students and then they worked on these tasks. Okay, in terms of the individual differences, motivation was more importantly included. There were differences between the two schools, age, and special needs education. So in terms of motivation, as I mentioned in the previous example, the teachers were really excited about the task, and also the students, and that could be considered as a problem-based activity. In terms of perceptions, there was a problem with definitions, so teachers couldn't provide definitions. And also they mentioned that problem-based learning can be used as a complementary approach and not just as a main approach in the classroom. And also they said that it can be used with older students, so aged 16, 17, and not necessarily early learners. So in terms of the discussion, as I mentioned, in terms of the second one, so when we talk about general learning problems, it is really important that in this task the learners didn't work collaboratively, they work individually. So that was also cannot necessarily be considered as a problem-based learning activity again. However, in terms of the motivation, what we find is in line with the literature, because the literature also says that intrinsic motivation is really important. So for conclusion, I would say we can say that language teachers do not use problem-based learning consciously, and also they do not necessarily exploit its full potential. And also probably a definition or redefinition is necessary in the field of language education, what we mean problem or language-related problems. So thank you very much. You can see the references here, and if you scan the QR code, you can find the website of our research group. Thank you.